Rhetoric, is a term that refers to the art of speaking beautifully or of convincing people in an argument. And it comes from an idea that when you speak to somebody, there are three things involved. One is that there's the logos, the word you want to say, the idea you want to get across. The second is that there is your authority, your ethos, that you're a good person to be saying that. And the next part is the idea of pathos, that you want the audience to feel something, so that you're opening them to feel the message you want to get across. And in some ways, that's the part that people, when they're dealing with rhetoric, deal the most. I have something to tell you, I have to convince you. I use rhetoric, beautiful ways of speaking. Then there's an idea that each speech is made up of a series of elements. I have to have an idea that I'm going to share with you, an invenzione, an invention, like a Bach invention. Then I need to put it together in a certain way that makes sense, a disposition, place the parts of it together. Then I need to say it in an appropriate way, in a right style. I have to remember it, have memoria, and then I have to perform it in a way that's also convincing. That includes the way I speak and even my manual gestures. So rhetoric even includes something called rhetoric of the hand. That it's appropriate if I tell you, I'm going to victory, I'll speak like this. I don't go, I'm going to go to victory. Along with this, there was an idea of parts of an argument. Well, first you start with an introduction, friends, Romans, countrymen. Then you give a proposition. Proposition might be something like a legal argument. It is right to feed one's family. My client stole bread, it's true, but it's right to feed one's family. It might go to a narration, tell the story farther. And then it might go to a confutation, a disagreement. My opponent says it's wrong to steal. And then we'll ask questions, but is it more wrong to steal than it is to starve your children? And go through, and you come back to a confirmation. All of these are parts of rhetoric, the idea of bringing something across. The last part about rhetoric is called figura, figure, ornament. These are things that are not necessary, but they make the speech more exciting and open you up to, oh my goodness. Politicians use repetition quite a lot. We will have victory. We will have victory. We are going to win. That's a kind of rhetoric. You don't need to say it 3 times. Obama in our country, yes we can, when he ran for president. Yes we can. That was a kind of a rhetorical figure. All of these elements appear in music. The other part about this is that rhetoric could refer to speaking as in a court case or giving a great speech in honor of somebody, but it could also be poetry. And this was where you see mostly music and rhetoric engaging together. Poetry was called a second rhetoric in the Middle Ages. It was a type of rhetoric. Why? Because it was a rhetoric that dealt with speech that had numbers and meter. So when you speak in Latin poetry, la, di, da, long, short, long, short, long. So it was considered metrical rhetoric. So this was called Poetica, the art of making somebody feel this, but in a metrical way, in this kind of speech. That made it belong to the 3 parts of the liberal arts that are associated with speech, logic, grammar, and rhetoric.
Havia também outra série de artes muito conhecida e estudada na Idade Média, a arte dos números. Eram estudos que envolviam a matemática, a geometria, a astronomia e a música, relacionando essas práticas de forma única. Acreditava-se então que a música eram números que podiam ser ouvidos.
In the Middle Ages, people knew that a 1-to-2 ratio, bong, bong, made an octave. So there was number in music. A 2-to-3 ratio, bong, bong, made a fifth. A 3-to-4 ratio, bong, bong, made a fourth. So the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 are foundational numbers, but they're also the foundations of music. Around 1400, 600 years ago, there came a new idea that poetry was also a species of music because it had number in its meter. So there was this great notion that poetry was both a kind of rhetoric, but it was also a kind of music. So it had a place in the trivium and in the quadrivium, very special place in the liberal arts. In the 16th century, madrigal composers writing songs, they would set love songs to music. They were fascinated with using music to bring across what was in the poetry. So if somebody wrote, I'm so happy to see you, composers would want to make the music fit that text. If they wrote, and yet I'm so sad that you'll be leaving, they would make something sad. This is where we get to maybe a first musical example of how would somebody do that? Well, once somebody says, I'm sad, and they use this melody, somebody hears it. Everybody says, yes, that sounds sad. It takes on a meaning just like a word takes on everybody. Oh, I know that word. That's the sad word. Or if happy, I'm very happy. So you might say, I'm happy, 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 yet I'm so sad. And once this happened, people started saying, oh, there's a vocabulary of things that mean something, and I can use that to paint in music, to paint my text. And that's the birth of a new idea for composers. They used to say there were two kinds of music books you would learn from. There was musica practica. How do I compose? How do I sing? How do I read rhythms? How do I do the practical parts of making music? The second was musica speculativa, the theory of music. That would be, how is an octave divided? How is it that the notes are related to the planets? Because astronomy and music are related. All these things were about the numbers themselves. But along with this movement in the Renaissance period came a new idea that there was a new kind of music called musica poetica, meaning music that was trying to give you a message related to the text. And this gave birth to a whole movement of Germans in north of Germany listening to great Italian composers set all kinds of texts like this and saying, there's a language there. The last step of this, it led to a notion that, oh, wait, you set the text like that, but what if I have no text? So what if I play you a piece of music that goes, everybody knew I just told you two things. That's the first sort of step, this moment where people said, oh, wow, the music can tell me something.
E foi justamente este propósito didático que Lutero viu na música. Para ele, essa arte era um presente que Deus havia dado à humanidade. Muito mais que um ato de expressão de si mesmo, a música era, na visão de Lutero, uma espécie de reflexão sobre a relação do homem com o Criador. Desta forma, as composições do barroco alemão deveriam ter dois objetivos principais: condicionar o ouvinte a um estado receptivo e dar ênfase ao texto sagrado, criando assim uma experiência com o divino.
Somebody can amplify a text. So if I give you a sacred text, I can explain it to you in a way that makes it bigger and makes it more clear. This is actually an old idea from the Bible, biblical commentary. Jesus talks in parables so that you can, parables are stories, fables. So that he says, I'll tell you a story about a father and his son, but he's really talking about you and God. So Lutherans were very interested in this. Johann Sebastian Bach, we now have his Bible. And his Bible has commentaries on different parts of the Bible, and you can compare those to the music he wrote. He was trying to do something. You add this to actually another idea that's not strictly rhetoric, but it's part of rhetoric, and it's the idea of amplificatio, is to amplify, to make commentary on, to interpret. It comes back from an old idea of biblical commentary, to make allegory. So if I want to tell you something, I find ways that you recognize mean something bigger. So when Bach would write about a piece of music where he is voicing your soul singing in a dialogue with God or with Jesus, it's actually interesting. He makes the human soul a soprano voice, and he makes Jesus a bass voice. They're like a relationship together, like a man and a woman. And that emphasizes or amplifies that relationship between you and God, which is so hard to explain. So you bring it down in something that's very personal. This is one of the reasons the Lutheran tradition of singing hymns, that everybody sung, they could all understand the hymns, but they also used popular songs they all knew. That's in some ways a very medieval, old-fashioned idea, the idea that I can use something very earthly to describe something that's much higher. Luther was a big fan of music, and many Protestants believed music should be much simpler. Also, many Catholics, people interested in religion, music should be just so simple, it shouldn't seduce your soul away from sacred things. And he was actually a big fan of polyphonic music, music of Josquin. Two of our most famous quotes about Josquin de Prez, who was a very famous composer from his day, come from Martin Luther, because he was such a big fan. And that's why we have such a great tradition in the Lutheran Church of composing beautiful polyphony and very highly crafted art, as opposed to in some other Protestant denominations where we sing very simple metrical psalms. So Bach is sort of the culmination of this tradition of Luther saying, I want to use those great composers who are writing very fancy polyphony. In the sense of the compositional craft, one of the great impacts this had was everybody German had a tradition of singing a song, a melody they knew, but the kind of music that Martin Luther liked and that the composers around him are writing, they would take that one idea and they'd put it in the other voices. So they might take a theme like, "A mighty fortress is our God." Once they did that, they'd add that in kind of imitation. And that's the tradition that leads to the great fugal writing of Bach. The same way that somebody could take text that everybody knew and give a sermon on that text. The Lutheran tradition in music led to a popular use of the idea that I can take a piece of music everybody knows, like a hymn tune, "A mighty fortress is our God, ein feste Burg ist unser Gott," and I can make musical commentary on that, and it adds to the excitement. Bum 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 ba 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 beep ba ba bum ba 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 beep ba 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 bum. That you're actually emphasizing and you're making the text more, but you're not seducing somebody. You're just telling them more of what's there, and it arouses their emotions. And one of the ways it was believed to arouse their emotions had to do with something very physical about how you received emotions, about your affects and your passions. It was believed that in the Baroque period, Descartes, for instance, was one of the people that talked about this, that there were certain fundamental emotions everybody had: anger, joy, hate, love, pride. I love another one that's hard to explain, is wonder. To wonder at something. And Descartes actually said the first one is wonder. Get somebody fascinated, and that opens them up. The idea of the passions, the word passion, is part of a little marriage between action and passion. When somebody acts on you, then you feel the passion. You're like the patient, the word patient, and passive. And passion comes from you receive something. And so the idea of the passions was that things would come to you and they would do something physically that makes you feel those emotions. And one of the ways they believed they would make you feel that emotion, you would hear something. For instance, this figure you hear in music, diggity, diggity, was a figure, because of that fast figure, would make you feel happier. And this is the way it would work. It's not good science. It would go to you would hear it, and your pineal gland, down here somewhere in the bottom of your brain, your pineal gland would tell your body to produce one of the humors. If it told your body to produce more blood, sang, it'd make you more sanguine or happy. If it made something that made you feel more droopy and tired, phlegm, it would make you feel phlegmatic. Or if it made you feel bilious and angry, make bile in your system, you get angry, you'd be bilious. And then if it made you create black bile, the word in Greek for black bile is melancholia. It would make you feel melancholic. So here's something that will make you this figure was made to believe you feel sad, but then this one made you feel even more sad. To go in half steps, I'll do that again. To do half steps downward, it was believed that the action of the music would reach you and you would then feel the passion that it invoked in your system. And that because there was that language of all those figures, you would recognize that language. You'd know what somebody was saying to you. And all the way through this period, the early modern period, Middle Ages, Renaissance, there was a belief that we were a small world that represented the big world, microcosm and macrocosm, and that everything we sense in this world was a vestige, just a remainder, vestigia, a remainder of the divine we can no longer see. And that if we somehow reproduce good numbers, good proportions, that were actually also representing and resonating something divine. This led to people feeling that if you performed something in music that had a divine association or had a good proportion, you were recreating that also, in a sense, you can making a connection to heaven. This led composers to do really cool things, like Guillaume Dufay in the 15th century, French composer working in Italy for Pope Eugenius IV. At the time, in 1430s, they were finishing the dome of Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, Brunelleschi's famous dome. They dedicated the cathedral, and Dufay said, I would like to use those numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, the Pythagorean proportions, to make the proportions of my music, and I would like to make them match something like the cathedral, but also recreate the proportions of the Temple of Solomon. So I'm writing a piece of music that says this is a beautiful place and it's like the Temple of Solomon. The notion that I could tell you a piece of music, I could say something in music, that you would recognize those things, that you would know what you're hearing and you could think about it, but also you would feel those things, is the theoretical concept of rhetoric. Also, in German tradition, they talked about I can make a piece of music in the shape of an argument. So I can tell you something like this. That's a sighing figure. And then but then I might narrate it more. That tells me more of that thought. I can make a question mark. Oh, I'm asking questions. Or I might emphasize that figure by making it sigh. Make little rest and things. So that notion, all those things we've talked about the affects happening, and about the notion that you can amplify a text, is part of the theory. And it's those figures and musical devices, that language, they believed everybody knew. They thought it was a universal language.
Ele navega bem entre os universos erudito e popular. Na música clássica brasileira, o oboé foi trabalhado por nomes como Heitor Villa-Lobos, Ernesto Nazaré, Radamés Inátali e Francisco Mignoni. Com uma sonoridade única, o instrumento também tem chamado a atenção de novos compositores por sua versatilidade e ganhado um repertório contemporâneo.